everybody, welcome back to another reasonable price prediction, the series where we try to figure out where your favorite altcoins could be headed. Now today we're looking at Rune, and if you watched the last Rune video, which you may or may not have, you'll notice that this graph and chart looks a bit less cluttered, and that's because while the information I provided was quite useful and is actually playing out in the way that I thought it might, it's nice to have a much clearer view of what's going on. And also, if I just made a video with the same graphs and lines and said, yeah, this is what we said we thought would happen, that's happened, it's kind of like, that's end of video. So I want to bring something new and potentially even come up with scenarios that contradict what I've said before. Again, narrative always follows the price. Whatever happens, there's always going to be someone with an explanation of why that happens. And sometimes that'll be me. And I might say it beforehand and say this could happen, and it happens. But it's never a surefire guarantee in anything with these markets. The only thing you can count on is that they are unpredictable, as cliche as that sounds. So getting down to the brass tacks, the main thing that I want to focus on in today's video is the time that leads up to the halving. Specifically these sort of white lines that contain Rune, or did contain Rune last cycle, excuse me. So we're not going to look at too much of what happens after the halving, because if we're going off historical reference, we can see that the price just goes up, basically. So zooming into what happened last time, let's break it down. Rune launches in August of 2019 at a price of 1.5 cents. And over the course of the year, Rune does a 7-8x. It goes from 1.5 cents to 11 cents. So under a 10x leading up to the halving. But it gets to this level of 11, 12 cents pretty early. In fact, before the end of the year, it gets to this high, and it sets this high. And then from that point on, it basically operates within this range. It sets a low, sets a high, and then it bounces up and down between them up until the halving when it breaks out. And you'll notice that we bounce off the bull market support band as well. That's when we make our move up, when we test the bull market support band on the weekly. And you'll notice these two circles that I've drawn, the pink and the orange, these just basically represent the lows. The pink representing a time when Rune just goes low, but doesn't break below the bull market support band. And the orange represents a time we did break below the bull market support band. So if we zoom out and take a look at current day, we can see that we have our white lines potentially that we've set. We set a high, come down and set a low. We put in our pink where we just dropped to the bottom. And funnily enough here, we actually tested the bull market support band and bounced up. Unlike last time where we didn't test the bull market support band. Here now on the pink, we have actually tested the bull market support band like we said, but found support and have rallied up. Last time when we found our low from our pink, we went back up to the high that we set previously, which is currently $17. Again, last time it was 12 cents, so big price discrepancies, but more or less a similar range. Like if we take how far Rune fluctuated during the first cycle, it went in a range of about 100% of a move up, so it's kind of a 2x from where it went. And here we're dealing with a 70% move of where we are. So again, not too crazy. And also this could potentially break above. We're just looking at weekly closes, but you know, every cycle is different. We could see Rune move above, we could see Rune break below. It's very difficult. Another similarity is that we put in this high before the end of the year, like we did last time. We set this high in early December, the start of December, and here we set this high at the end of November. Basically the same week, give or take, plus 4 years. So just some interesting similarities. Another thing that happened last cycle was that we entered the halving just below, or during the halving week, Rune spent most of its time at this white level, this upper band, if you will, this resistance that Rune set earlier. Actually, excuse me, we can see that we do open and close a small bit above this white line, this resistance. So, and that was coming up from the pink circle, so we could potentially move above, who knows. But what's important for now is that we saw that Rune, during the halving week, give or take, and the weeks before and the weeks after, stayed at a price close to this resistance, which was 12 cents. Rune basically stayed at 12 cents this whole time. It dropped down to like 10 cents and a half, but realistically not huge fluctuations. So potentially what we could see Rune do as we get closer to the halving is it could stay at a price of around, well, below $7 anyway, but it could range from $6.50, $6.40 up to $7. Kind of depends if it wants to play out in a similar way like it has before. And we have seen so far that we do have a lot of similarities. Now, there is a few things that you might want to point out and say aren't correct or aren't similar. The first one being the time frame that it takes Rune to put in this high from its low. And we can see here, like, from with either one, whichever you want to take as your low, it takes a good 16, 18 weeks here. And whereas previously that's like 8 weeks that it takes Rune to go from this low to this high. Now, I wouldn't counter, it's not a counter, but I would say it's always very unreliable to use at least the first couple of months of data on a new altcoin. And I know that kind of contradicts what's going on here, but definitely the first month or two, I don't put much weight into, because there's so much speculation crammed into those first few weeks that the price is totally uncorrelated from what the project is actually doing and what it could be. So for me, I would take this as the low, and I would kind of assume it from here, the same thing. If Rune had been around longer, I'm sure it would have bottomed out much before end of 2019. I'm sure it would have reached much lower lows. But again, we're in complete speculation territory now. So I would just take it from here personally. You're looking at 20 weeks, give or take, for this time frame. 7th of August to 27th of November, at least 15 weeks. Here we're looking at 7. So again, a few things that don't line up perfectly. Also, the amount of time that we spend from this high leading up to the halving. We have 23 weeks when we put in this first initial high that sets our white resistance. If we take a look at where we set our white resistance and how far away we are from the halving, it's 21 weeks. Now for me, this is close enough that it's not really an outlier or a discrepancy or something that disproves the theory. You could even argue that 2 weeks before, when we put in this green wick here, that would be where the top could have been potentially set or was basically set. So for me, it's not something that I would go, we can't put much stock in this theory because, we're 2 weeks off. Again, I always say that these markets, they follow the same general trend. And when you zoom out, things look similar. But when you zoom in, it's a completely different story to what we saw last time. One last thing that I'll quickly note, and that is to do with the future of where Rune could go. An interesting thing to keep in mind for maybe a few years down the line is this local high that Rune puts in before the Bullrun year, usually. And it does act as a decent resistance. We see Rune tests it quite a few times before breaking out above in the Bullrun year. But this level of $1 that Rune reached back in 2020, late August, September time, ended up basically being the same price that Rune would nearly bottom out at. Now, Rune did actually go a bit lower towards the middle of 2023. It did put in an extra leg down, but ultimately didn't fall too much lower. It went down to 80 cents basically. So while that is an extra 20% drop, it's a good idea to maybe keep in mind that wherever we move in sort of the first few months after the halving, the first 15 weeks, the first 3-4 months, and when we put in a local high, that could represent the low during the next bear run. Now, I know that's very far off, but again, it's important to think about these things now so that you can have ample time to prepare for them in the future. And again, this is just a little one-off thing that I'm throwing in because it's interesting to me, but just something to be aware of. This local high basically was the same price of where we put in our low. In terms of where I think Rune can go this next cycle, as I keep looking at these charts, I keep changing. I keep moving to and from and kind of adjusting my opinion. And while usually I would be quite reserved on saying outlandish returns on altcoins, I do think Rune could do very well. I mean, from the halving last time, this is always a good ballpark I like to use, from the halving to the high, Rune went up 21,000%, so 210x. If you get half of that from the halving, and say we use this white line as our example, because we thought we'd probably finish or cross the halving at a similar price here, and we say we make a 100x, I mean, that's like crazy. It puts us well above a $300 Rune and probably puts us close to a $500 Rune. I mean, I'll take another look. We go for a 100x here. Yeah, it puts you basically above a $750 Rune. And that's if we get half the performance that we got last cycle. Now, there is no guarantee anything like this could happen. But if we get a quarter of what we had last time, it puts us at about, you know, an $80 Rune. Realistically, I don't think that's too out of the question. And that's still a 50x move from where we're going from the halving, which to me sounds outlandish, especially when you take it from these lows, because that's where it gets even crazier. Like if you take Rune from its low to its high, you get astronomical numbers. You get a 2,800x move. And if you go like a 1,400 move from its low, it's going to put you somewhere like above $1,000, and that's half of it. Again, if you take a quarter, like you're going to maybe, if you take a quarter of that, like half it, you're basically ending up $30. I think Rune can easily go above that. And the fact that, again, we've had this strong rally leading up to the halving is a good sign for me. It shows that there is strength. And the fact that we are playing out very similarly does show that we could have these crazy price moves. Even if they're not to the same magnitude that we saw here, still definitely room for a 15x, which I don't think is too outlandish to assume. And if you take like a 20x, excuse me, I need to adjust this chart again. And if you take another 20x, you're still making serious money, you know, like that's putting Rune about $150, which I think is probably possible considering that the previous all-time high was $20. You're looking at about an 8x from the previous all-time high, which to me again is like, seems difficult but also doesn't seem unreasonable at all. So for me, that's personally where I can see Rune being in about a year and a half, or a year and a couple months, 2 or 3 months. Moving to the Bitcoin pair, again we're looking at the same chart. I don't like to overload with new information. Sometimes it's nice to introduce some new information but also reinforce a bit of the old stuff. Here we can see basically the same thing. We have our white trend lines showing us the way up. We have our green support that showed us where we bottomed out last cycle. We have our halving dates here that are projected. This one is projected anyway, again, late April. And we have these two interesting points here, that this ascending wedge that we see as we go into the halving. And if we zoom in on what happened last time, we can see that basically Rune found support in an ascending wedge leading up to the halving, and then it came down and tested the bull market support band during the halving week. This is on its Bitcoin pair now, again, remember, and then rallied up and broke above this resistance that it had visited twice before, and broke above very easily. If we take a look at what is currently going on with Rune, we can see that we have a strong move up and setting this high, like we did last time. Strong move up, setting the high. We come down and test a low, and we come down and test a low, and this ascending wedge might not play out the same. Of course, it's very hard to assume these things, especially when half of it hasn't played out yet. But we've bounced, or we are technically bouncing off this low, and you can see that last time we stayed well above our bull market support band, but here we've actually had a few closes and opens below. So again, something that's a bit of a discrepancy and doesn't quite line up perfectly. But there is a good chance that Rune moves up from here, not impossible. And if it does, it could be likely that we revisit this previous high that we've set. Again, we saw that we had 2 tests of this upper resistance band before we crossed the halving. And then when we tested it again, we didn't even test, we just went straight above it. So potentially something like this could play out in a similar way. Again, if we take a look at how long it took Rune to test this high, it was 3 or 4 weeks before the halving. So if we take our current halving week and move minus 3 or 4 weeks, Rune still has a good while to go, basically until the end of March, and we are now in mid-February. So a good 5-6 weeks to make a move to the upside. I think that's definitely possible considering how we've seen Rune do moves of much stronger magnitude during the same time period. Not impossible at all. But again, these things don't always have to play out like they have. We might break down above this resistance, we might not reach it, we might fall out and retest this support here, and we could very well drop below it. Again, these are early days, and they're basically just historical references. Here we went up, and here we potentially could go up. It's just a nice way of showing what happened last time on the current data, just to keep that in mind. Like, there's arguments that you could make about potentially, you know, moving these 2 lines, the blue and the red, down to here, and maybe now because we've had these 2 tests at the top and broken above, We could be in sort of this area. Very, valid points technically. I do feel quite comfortable in comparing these two parts to each other, because just in terms of time frame and price movement, they are extremely similar. What did we see after Rune went through the halving, and what happened after the halving for Rune? It basically immediately took back value from Bitcoin. But unlike a lot of altcoins, when Rune had its big pullback, it didn't return to the lows that it was previously at. It maintained a lot of its value against Bitcoin. And then when the bull run came, it was able to keep pushing up against its Bitcoin pair, potentially leading to even higher highs than what it could have if it returned down to these lows, like most other altcoins did. So something very interesting to look at. In terms of the type of move Rune last time made on its Bitcoin pair after the halving, it made a 700-800% move. Assuming we don't know where we'll cross the halving, but we'll take a middle ground of between these two, because that could be something that plays out. And we take a 700% move, we can see I don't have enough space on the graph, but a 600% would put us above 85,000 Satoshis, which Rune is currently trading at 10,000 Satoshis. So again, nice moves, not terrible. Now again, it's not uncommon to see altcoins not break above as drastically on their Bitcoin pairs as we do on US dollar pairs. So these lines are sort of representatives of potential zones that we could see a lot of resistance on Rune and BTC, because naturally Bitcoin rallies as well, and as altcoins get older, they oftentimes don't move as crazily against the US dollar pair. Now I think Rune can still make a lot of crazy moves this bull run. I don't think it'll be a quiet altcoin in terms of price, but it wouldn't be unreasonable to assume that we also don't make a crazy sort of 43x on our Bitcoin pair from halving to high. We could maybe see a 20x. Who knows? Very difficult to say, but again, we often see the reduced volatility on the Bitcoin pairs occur much more suddenly than they do on the US dollar pairs. That's in other altcoins though. And again, Rune can be different. There's always exceptions. But with that said, I think that about wraps up the video. I can't think of anything else I really want to mention. If you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. That's totally fine. Comment down below what video you want next, or if you think I got something wrong. I missaid something last video, and someone corrected it in the comments, which is really useful. So thank you very much for calling me out on that. I appreciate it. Consider signing up to FairDesk, the exchange, with the link in the description. Not only do you get a deposit bonus, but you also get reduced trading fees. And I find leading up to these bull run sort of times, it's good to have multiple exchanges ready to go, because during bull runs, a lot of exchanges go down during the peak times because there's so much users using the exchanges. So make sure you always have a couple backups, and the time to make those backups, create those accounts, is now, because you don't want to be messing around with KYC when it's the peak of the bull run and you have to wait 2 days before you can trade. That's a nightmare. So get them set up now and consider FairDesk as one of them. Thanks very much, guys. Take care and peace.